Welcome back. In feeling what is present, it's difficult to explore it in terms of the categories of normal human thought, of normal human interpretation, which are not actually relevant to what is present. So you might explore it with regards to classifications of the senses, the five senses. You might explore it with regard to mind, thought, all these preconceived components or aspects of experience that interpretation abstracts into being. But in actuality, none of these exist as separate categories or as components. So as your yoga progresses, you'll arrive at a point where you'll be able to be with this fully as it is, full field, without categories, without separate divisions or branches or aspects of bandwidth. And you'll discover what this actually is. This is an absolutely inclusive continuum. It's, actuality is an absolutely inclusive continuum of an infinite degree of flavors, frequencies, textures. There's no language to talk about this. And most especially all the conceptual categories that we ordinarily divide it in terms of don't apply to what this actually is. So in order to facilitate efficiency in yoga, it's best to just feel what is present. Just relax and just feel the fullness of it without worrying about what it is that's being felt, without any tendency to categorize it or to think, well, now I'm thinking, now I'm seeing, now, any of this kind of compartmentalizing. Just feeling the presence of this actuality just as it is. That is the most powerful and the most direct technique of yogic exploration.
And it's so interesting because initially the mind wants to just negate it. It's like, and but seeing that, it's,
I find that relaxation is really important for me to, that tightness just sort of acts like armor, which one doesn't need, but the relaxation just sort of facilitates the feeling.
Sure. Relaxation, letting go, all those kinds of things, because that, by its very nature, the way body-mind seems to work, that when concepts are formed, mind tries to actualize them, and then the body sort of hypnotically simulates what it would feel like if those were true. So as a result, the body has all these various tightnesses oriented around these various concepts, subliminally and not necessarily linearly. And so in relaxing, that immediately relaxes the simulations in the body of the truth of the concepts, of the interpretations. And so then there's a kind of a releasing or a letting go of that orientation to a certain extent.
what I mean to be saying is, initially I would parse them out. Here's sound, here's this, here's that. In the absence of parsing them and just being, just experiencing. It can seem like nothing's happening, but that's just to the mind, it seems that way too. I mean, that's what I'm not saying that that's all there is, but that's how it can appear. He's not gonna say a word.
Well, what seems to the mind is unimportant.
Yeah.
The important thing is the direct engagement, just the immediate engagement with sensitivity and inherent intelligence. Not analytical intelligence, but just felt sensitivity.
So what you just said about just being with your experience without categorizing it in any way, I mean, that's really all you need to do, right?
Yep.
You know, sometimes we want to make it more complicated. Like, oh, we gotta figure out this and figure out that.
Yeah.
But that's all you
Nothing to
need.
figure out.
Huh?
Nothing to figure out.
Nothing to figure out.
So if the mind automatically categorizes, I guess that's fine. But if the undercurrent is, to optimize it somehow through these categories,
Right.
that's the. Because even the mind categorizing, you could feel your way through.
Can feel what?
You can feel the substance of the mind doing its categorization.
Sure. Sure. I mean, mind is present. Mind is an aspect of this. But in just this present, mind is not mind. Mind is just
Earlier, you used a couple of times the phrase, I think it was, as the unfoldment deepens, I think you said. Now, I take it this is something that is always, always deepens, right? There's no
Yes.
point where it's like, okay, process is over with now,
no.
or, but then what is realization? Is that a certain point where something changes, or?
Realization, you could say, is a tipping point where the primary orientation is to actuality rather than the primary orientation being to mental interpretations.
But the deepening still continues after.
Oh yes, absolutely. Deepening is eternal. The nature of this is to be continually opening to itself, eternally.
And in your previous analogy of up the hill and down the hill, would you say the tipping point is top the hill in a sense?
No. The tipping point in terms of what I call realization happens sort of as you're coming down. pretty down, well on your way down the hill. About 300 feet before
A dynamic I've really been sensitized to lately is the sort of uncomfortableness of, in any given moment, imagining or expecting that it should be another way. You know?
Right, yeah.
And then I'm kind of trying to reconcile that with the practical planning of everyday living.
Right.
Do you have anything to say about when the suffering element of expectation comes together with
Yeah.
everyday function?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's sort of two simultaneous modes of engagement. One is the extrapolation and mental extrapolation of, well, let's see, I want to accomplish this, so I should approach it this way and that way. And so you basically erect a hypothetical series of scenarios in your mind of how things can go. But then concurrently with that is the actuality of engagement in real time, which is always an improvisation and always entirely unpredictable and unexpected. So in other words, so you have it's like you have a map of where you want to go and how to get there, and then you have the real-time engagement of what's actually happening in the moment, which is always going to deviate from the map. But the engagement with it actually doesn't depend upon the map. The engagement just is a real-time enactment of your own capability, of your own functionality.
So
The trick is to not worry too much about trying to get the two to be together, to let the mental interpretations go their way and simultaneously function directly, and not without being too concerned about pulling them together.
So
And then you'll find more and more that concern happens in the abstract and is less emotional, and the functioning becomes sort of an interesting engagement of improvisation rather than something where the concerns that you have in the abstract sort of get translated into the immediacy, and so then seem to have some urgency. If you follow that.
somewhat. So to the extent that, we make an appointment or something like that, and
Right.
we assume that we'll be present for the appointment, we know we can't control the outcome of it.
Right.
But this appearance of the everyday functioning of life quite often goes according to how we anticipate it, somewhat. That's just kind of synchronicity
Well,
coincidence.
it never actually goes according to how we anticipate it if you look closely.
Right.
It only seems to go in accordance with how we anticipate it if you're generalizing. If you get down to specifics, it always deviates. And again, it's a matter of not being loose with that, letting, so I have an appointment at 3, so I know I have an appointment at 3, so I look at the clock and see that it's 20 of, and it's going to take me about 15 minutes to get there, so I'll leave. And, maybe I'll hopefully be there by 3, but maybe I hit traffic, maybe I get there early and the thing's canceled, maybe I get there early and they see me at 2:55, so it was not an appointment at 3. So, in other words, the flow of events always deviates in its specifics from the template, from the plan. And that's not a problem, that's just the fact. But as you let yourself function, just as you come to trust your own spontaneous improvisational ability in the moment, you'll have less and less anxiety about plans and more of a sense of competence and confidence to be able to just fake it and pull through it, whatever happens, rather than needing it to work out a certain way. You know, wait a minute, we're supposed to see me at 3, and here it is, 3:01, and they're late, I mean, a good example is a recipe, Our plans and our expectations are like recipes. But then when you get to actually cook what you're trying to cook, then you have real ingredients and a real situation and real utensils and a real stove and whatever and all the real world things. And, you deal with all of that, but it doesn't necessarily go precisely in accordance with the recipe. Maybe the recipe left some things out, or maybe, it's supposed to be like this after 5 minutes, and for you it's 6 minutes, or whatever, right? And you end up with something that doesn't look just like the picture in the recipe, and it's like, well, but that can be okay. It's just not expecting the two to correlate, realizing that the recipe is an abstraction, and the real world flow of events is not going to correspond to it precisely. There's no way, it can't happen.
And just the fact that there seems to be a certain degree of correlation is just part of the magic of the way it works.
Yeah, exactly. It's a miracle that these abstractions can be as useful as they are, but it's a fact that they're always imprecise. Not generally or usually or somewhat, but always completely imprecise. I mean, this is what one discovers about interpretation in general, mental pictures in general, is that they are never true to event. What actually happens is always different than what is thought to be happening, or is expected to be happening, or is being described as being happening. And this becomes clearer and clearer as one explores actuality and the relationship between one's actual experience, the direct experience, and the mental interpretations of experience that are happening concurrently. The mental interpretations are always wrong. Maybe useful, maybe, but always wrong, always inaccurate. But functioning doesn't happen in the mind. Functioning doesn't happen in mental interpretation. Functioning happens in direct energy engagement. You drive a car by driving the car, and you don't have to think about it to do it. You do it by feel. You feel the road, you see the patterns of light, your body responds. You don't think, oh gosh, I have to turn left up ahead. Now what do I do to turn left? Oh yeah, let's see. First of all, I turn the blinker, and then second of all, I slow. You don't do any of that, do you? You just do it. It's all just being done. Or how do you walk? I get up and walk. I don't have to think about what muscle to move, or dominating forward. It's just done. It's direct energy engagement. And real functioning in the real world, in actuality, it's always, it's entirely like that. It's entirely that. The actuality is a self-engagement of what it is.
There seems to be a consensus of reality around the degree of precision to stick to.
Around the what?
The degree of precision to stick to. So I agreed, yes, it is imprecise, but then it seems like some folks' patterns seem to correlate more with the expectation. So one person is good at planning,
Right.
And
yes, but even if it correlates more, it's still completely inaccurate. It's a closer inaccuracy, but it's still inaccurate. You see, the important thing about the inaccuracy is using concepts is fine, and that they're inaccurate is fine, and that you try to be precise with them is fine, and all of that's neither here nor there. But for the purposes of yoga, it's essential to not use concepts to define what is actual. And this is where the trouble comes in, especially when you define what you are as an entity, what your life is, what the world is, what objects are, what things are. These kinds of definitions is what causes the spiritual problem. This kind of orienting to conceptual definitions, by contrast with orienting to the actual presence of what is where all the problem comes in. So yoga consists of learning to transfer one's orientation to one's reality from a conceptual version of it to the actual presence of it. And so that one gets the benefit of the implications of the way it actually is, rather than the erroneous implications of what the interpretations imply. So whether you use interpretations or whether they're accurate or not is neither here nor there, but for purposes of definition, they're ultimately and completely inaccurate.
Maybe another way, I don't know if you were asking this, but it seems like the actual energy pattern at times involves an apparent other that has a different idea of how precise things should be or not be. And there is there's an understanding at some level, of course, that things are going to move, and it's relatively easy to do when by oneself. Like if I'm going to a dentist and I'm 10 minutes late or early, but if it's like something involving our kids that me and my wife have to agree to, it seems like it becomes more challenging. I'll just say that, like it's arising in the actuality right now.
Yeah.
And there is a reconciliation, negotiation, expectations that seem to come in, that are part of this energy pattern. But certainly those are the times in relationship where some of these things become, I find to be, challenging or interesting. Let me call it interesting. Did my question make sense?
Well, it doesn't seem. I don't see a question there.
So it's relatively easy. I find it here in the practice relatively easy to say, have a very loose idea between that reality is not going to go per plan. You still make a plan. You still say I need to go do an appointment, but it might not happen.
Right.
But when in that actuality there seems to be an other involved, right? And the plans have to work across those boundaries. They're not real boundaries, but across those. Then that's where the challenges seem to come up. In terms of, and my question is more, are there any suggestions or thoughts on how to view that in the sense of keeping with the yoga, keeping with the, allowing of the actuality and just experiencing.
Well, yeah, yoga is always concerned with the immediacy of what's present. So if there's a conceptual disagreement, the conceptual disagreement is itself conceptual, but there's the presence of the being that you're having the disagreement with, which is actual. And so what that is what you work with.
Did you say more?
Hmm?
Did you say more?
Well, yoga is not about smooth functioning. Yoga is about seeing what is. You may have abysmal functioning.
The way to that's in the same sense that Jesus probably said, "Who made me my brother's keeper?" As in, my kingdom is not of this world, but of the next. So I'm thinking that in all of this, what I'm hearing is that you could be dysfunctional in the world, and that doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't. From the point of view of yoga, it doesn't.
It's
Others are not others. As far as you know, others are apparitions in your experience. And the way, and what happens in terms of dealing with apparitions in your experience is whatever happens, according to what the system is, i.e. what you are, what everything is. So someone might walk in the room, and you all of a sudden you're furious about it. The same person might walk in the room, and someone else in the room is very happy about it. So there's no right or wrong. It's just you're enacting your. So you have a fight with your wife or something, or disagreement with your wife. That is you enacting, responding to the situation in accordance with your energy, playing itself out. And what's happening with her is her business. I mean, it becomes your business in the sense of you're dealing with it, and the outcome will be a result of how skillfully you deal with it, which is dependent upon how competent your nature is.
So maybe I'll try saying it a different way. It's not about dysfunction, because there,
Right.
I mean, you've somehow defined what is function, what is
Yeah,
dysfunction,
sure.
and I understand that, that's not, but there is just like there is a sense of allowing or being with the flow,
Yeah.
or trying to get into a mental interpretation
Right.
with the flow. I don't know what to call that. Maybe they're both okay, but there's a sense that there is a flow versus there is a
No,
fight
that,
with
sure,
the flow.
absolutely, very
That,
right.
at least I find, tends to relationships, and across the spectrum tend to be the places where they are the most interesting
Uh-huh.
in terms of pointing out, areas where you're stuck. It seems like
Sure.
that's my experience,
Yeah.
and so it's. Let me see that question. And so there's a felt sense that you are that something is right about the way the interaction is happening versus not. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting it into a functional dysfunction. It's not about functional dysfunctional as in there is harmony or agreement. That's not what I mean.
Right. No, I understand. Well, the more, to use the way you're putting it, the more you're in the flow,
Mhm.
the more the interaction is successful.
Yes.
Even if the result is unsuccessful,
Yeah.
according to various terms. But the more you're in the flow, the more you're genuinely enacting your nature without friction,
Yeah.
and so you feel good about that.
Right. And I guess the question then is are there specific thoughts or ideas or tips on this particular aspect of yoga? Which
Yes,
is in relationship where
Yeah. Well,
there's
it's
a complex.
yeah. Well, it's
negotiation.
the same as with any other situation. Be with what is immediately present. Be with the full presence of your experience as it is.
Which isn't necessarily the content.
No, it's not. It's not the content. I'm not talking about content. I'm talking about the presence of experience.
Right.
I mean, content may be present, but when content is present, it's not content anymore. It's presence. It's energy flavors in the present.
Mm.
And add to that, my wife, for instance, she expects that all of this inquiry and stuff should make my behavior better.
Not just she's your wife. Everything should make your behavior better.
Or she's happy to point out that it doesn't seem to be helping.
Sounds so familiar. Whatever happened, it is what it is.
We'll need to have the marriage counseling version of a talk sometime next
I'm trying to extrapolate all this, Peter.
So if I'm going to tell her it is what it is, and she's like, so you take the time off, and on top of that, you don't have any accountability.
I'll just say on the flip side that, yeah, that sometimes you do get a compliment that you just seem to be a nicer person. So it goes both ways.
But yoga is definitely a solo sport. Yoga is something that you do, and it's not something that can be done in concert with other people, because everyone is unique, everyone is in a unique situation, everyone is in a unique relationship with their own energies, and the job of yoga is, for the individual, is to be with what that is, open to what that is, and that particular range of flavors, let's say, is the actuality that individual has to work with for their yoga. And anyone else's range of flavors is going to be different. Their energies are going to be different. So yoga is very individualized. It's very important to understand this, especially if you're reading books or coming to talks like this. There's no one size fits all. It's very, very important to make your spiritual inquiry very personal to you, and to always be with the way things are for you, rather than trying to make your experience correlate to some way it's supposed to be, that the book says it's supposed to be this or that, and so you try to shoehorn it into that. You have to be with the genuineness of what you are. So, the first and last step of yoga is be with what is present in the way that it is present, as it is. And that right away, you're in the midst of the authenticity of your being, the authenticity of your nature. And that is both your challenge and your vehicle to solve the challenge. And for everyone, it's unique and individual. And no two people are in the same challenge, and no two people have the same resources to bring to bear on it, and no two people are in the same place in their unfoldment. So it's very important to be authentic and genuine to yourself, to what's really going on with you. In a profound sense, yoga is about honesty. It's about being honest, being really genuine and honest with what is happening.
Maybe you'll say a little bit more about other people as apparitions. Maybe that would be interesting.
Well, from the point of view of yoga, other people are not important.
Well, I'm just solo, but there's a lot of people here that are in relationships, so it might be interesting just to hear.
Well, no, I'm not. Relationship is fine, but relationship. If I'm in relationship, I'm in relationship, and then the person I'm in relationship with, they're in relationship. So the way I'm in relationship is my business, and the way they're in relationship is their business. It's when you get an us, it's when the relationship gets a capital R and becomes a third entity. That's when you're in trouble.
That's right. Now what about the entity?
I mean, successful relationship is you be you and I'll be me.
Yeah, yeah.
Which also looks like unsuccessful relationship. Functionally.
To somebody, yeah.
But on the other hand, if you being you and me being me leads to unsuccessful relationship, then so be it. That's good, that's healthy. To try to pretend you're getting along with someone that you don't get along with, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
So this is, in honesty, we're talking from relationships, which is not really the province of yoga. But, honesty of just genuinely being what you are is a master key, not just to yoga, but to living your life in a satisfying way. Because the more you are who you really are, the less you're trying to be something you're not, the more satisfying you will probably tend to find your experience.
But the apparition, you're just saying it doesn't matter.
Apparitions are apparitions. This is an apparition, this is an apparition, this is an apparition, that's an apparition.
Who cares?
They're pretty pictures, they're energies to dance with.
Okay. I can take that.
They can be profound dances. They
Oh,
can
there's
be-
no limit to the depth. The dance is exquisite.
Yeah.
You know, you're dancing with God.
Mm-hmm.
God dancing with God is the best. You know.
So the word apparition just doesn't really.
Yeah, the apparition. That's not a good word.
Appearance.
Divine manifestation.
That's lovely. I like that.
It's hard to fight with
Much
that.
better. Yeah.
No, you know, in all of this, be very careful not to give much attention to the connotation of words. The words have no importance whatsoever. It's about what the words are referring to that matters. So the apparition is not about whether or not it's an apparition per se. It's about, you know, the nonverbal actuality, the fact that the word refers to, regardless of what word you're using and what its connotations are.
If anything, it can open you up more to the mystery instead of your concepts of this person in front of you that you've known
Yeah.
forever. I'm going to just
Yeah.
to be open up to it, like, wow, I have, like you've always said, there's a universe in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people are mysteries. People are bottomless mysteries. You know, as everything. This is also bottomless mystery. I mean, to use the dreaded A word, apparitions are bottomless mysteries. And so there's a profundity, there's a richness, there's an invitation to really deep experience and deep interaction with this, with anything. So saying, you know, it's not a matter of devaluing people. On the contrary, we're giving them more value by letting them be what they are, which is divine mystery, rather than some stereotyped list of concepts that you have in your head defining them and defining the relationship. Oh, this is the relationship is this, X, Y, Z. It's like, no, the relationship is whatever it happens to be, and it doesn't have names or words.
It reminds me of Greg, your student, who's a lawyer, and he would go into the court, and he would see the judge in a whole new way, like energetically and infinitely out, and he would see his opponents, and he would just trip, but at the same time, he had his case, and so that was, you know, he was an example of navigating this new awareness and like, wow, but somehow staying in his lawyer.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, functionality improves greatly when you're with everything as radiance. The concepts just mark things up. The definitions and the roles just mark things up. You know, and genuineness, honesty, and intimacy, you know, are keys to really, you know, this ideal functioning. To really be what you are and really do what you do optimizes your functioning. And hence optimizes relationship, optimizes effectiveness, optimizes all kinds of things. Without targeting those things as individual entities. It's just a single across the board, being yourself fully in the instant. Because that's where everything is done. So if you're fully in the instant, you know, engaged in your authenticity, then you're maximizing your functionality, your ability to do whatever it is you're capable of doing, including relationship, including any kind of worldly functioning.
So when people are living from their stories, you know, that's really difficult. I mean,
Yeah, it just comes up the worst
comes up the work.
for them and for everyone else. You know, I mean, that's the dilemma. That's the spiritual problem. You know, I mean, you're a psychologist. That's the psychological problem too, no doubt.
That's what I'm realizing. I'm banging my head on the wall.
But the spiritual problem, you know, from the spiritual point of view, It's the ultimate problem of, you know, what is. You're not just concerned with, from a psychological point of view, your goal is to benefit your patients, you know, functioning or whatever, benefit their emotional health, I don't know, whatever. But from a spiritual point of view, your goal is to really solve the problem of what is actual, what is reality. Which is ultimately the same problem, but the spiritual takes it all the way.
People are afraid to lose their story.
Yes, people are attached to their story. It's a challenge for the yogi, especially in the beginning stages, because we're so used to thinking that our security and our functionality depends upon our stories, our definitions, our interpretations of things. And it's easy to have the fear that, wait a minute, I'm stepping off into this crazy spiritual stuff, and it's going to rob me of my mind and myself, and rob me of my concepts, and then I'm going to end up being a homeless person drooling on himself in the corner, on the street corner or something. I mean, it's a very common fear, you know, but there's not necessarily any basis for it. And on the other hand, if you achieve spiritually and you end up being a homeless person drooling on yourself in the corner, you won't mind. You'll be perfectly happy.
It's all relative.
And that's one of the things about spiritual enlightened people. There's only one, in all of our traditional stories or actually or whatever history, we have only one example, and that too is from mythology, of a person who's enlightened and he's a king and he runs the kingdom. So the rest of the folks are all like wandering sannyasis and bums, so to speak. So they really don't function this way.
Right. But the real world isn't like that. In the real world, people who are realized are in all different sorts of walks of life. They're all not necessarily, you know, renunciates. But these people aren't necessarily acknowledged by great spiritual tradition. I think there may be a mechanism to this. I think it may be that common people like to admire someone that's sufficiently different from themselves so that they can, you know, so here's Ramana sitting naked, you know, in his loincloth, and here I am, he's me, and I have my job and my wife and my problems. So he's so different, so that's easier for me to see him as special and something to aspire to. And at the same time, it's a little less threatening because I know I'm never going to really get there. So I'm not faced with the difficulty of having to actually give up and deal with my shit.
Or wear a loincloth.
You know, there are many realized people in the world. There always have been. There always will be. And most of them are not acknowledged. Most of them are, you know, are not. Don't have religions founded for them.
Would you say that happens different times when someone's, you might say, completely ignorant of conceptual understanding that you talk about or something like that? They just never thought about it. They just, I am what I am, can't change it, I don't care, you know? Do you know what I'm saying? Like seemingly just completely simple people who don't get it down.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that can be a form of realization, or does there
It
need to
can
be
be.
an understanding?
It can be if there's not a subliminal level of holding things to be a certain way.
You mentioned before that there are people who are realized that don't realize that they're realized, don't know that they're realized.
Well, there may be, but they may not qualify as realization if they're never exposed to spiritual tradition.
They just think this is life as such. This is just life.
Yeah, who knows, maybe, yeah.
You know what I just realized is when you were saying about homeless, it just dawned on me that, you know, it's thought that thinks that's the dreaded circumstance, that's the dreaded condition.
Of course.
But when, yeah, it's thought. Because look at the people who are dealing with a hurricane. I mean, you know, they're not real life people, but they have to muddle through it. I mean, it's just it's just dealing with whatever is arising.
Sure. That's all that there is.
That's so
Dealing with what's
crazy. I
arising.
mean, it's just so crazy. We think, oh, that would be just terrible. But it's just,
Well, that's the thing, that's where you don't know what anything is, because something's beating their heart, something's holding them to the earth, and they're not falling off the earth.
Yeah.
The earth is floating somewhere,
Yeah.
you know, and on and on and on. It's such an elaborate, intelligent mystery. You just can't say anything about it.
That's the truth.
It seems like there's plenty of times when there's just open clarity, we call it that, spell sense. And then there is a noticing at times of patterns, conditioning, I'll call it, whatever, like where one temporarily gets swept away by a story that
Sure.
maybe comes from whatever, like some idea or something from the parent past. Is there any value in this yoga in noticing that, or is it just very simple, just, you know, stay with the felt sense?
Well, definitely notice it. Notice whatever's present. Absolutely. It's not a matter of do this and don't do that. Whatever's present, be with it as it is. Everything is the genuineness of your being. And so, if you're with openness and clarity, let's say, it seems to be that flavor, then that's the genuineness of your being. If you're lost in conceptual thought or something, then that's the genuineness of your being. But if you're being with that as the genuineness of your being, you will notice it's more than just the thoughts. It's especially more than just the story that the thoughts are saying. So the thoughts might be saying, oh, there's this, whatever, this problem, that problem, who knows what. So the thoughts are saying that, but even as the thoughts are saying that, there's more than that present in experience. And if you're with your experience, you'll notice that moreness. So you could say it's a matter of being sensitive to the totality of what's present. Not in a forced way, but in a way of noticing that you are, in fact, already sensitive to everything that's present. So even if attention is really fixated on something, you also know that there's sound over here, there's light over here, you know there's a chair here, you know all these things even if you're not paying attention to it. And that knowing is the important knowing. Not the knowing of the conscious attention, but the inherent attention, the attention of the presence of experience itself.
So let me just give a concrete example, just so I make sure my question is
Mhm.
understood. Say I have a pattern from childhood about him. As a kid, you should be responsible about certain things.
Right.
That's kind of a thing that is drilled into you, or a lot. And so, even though it's clear at this point that that's just some approximation, it's not real. Don't hold on to it as something, oh, this is important as a story. Right? When the behavior happens, say with my kids, for example, there is a noticing of that, like an energy appearing,
Uh-huh.
which is both physical, thought, somatic,
Yeah.
thought, all of that coming together
Mhm.
into the now.
Right.
And that seems to come along with whatever else is happening, whether
Yes.
it's sounds or other stuff.
Yes.
So that specific fraction or segment, if you want to call it, I know there is no segment, but,
Yeah.
that reoccurring pattern, is there value in seeing that, or is it better to just not try to make any? Because in seeing that, there is conceptualization.
What do you mean by seeing it?
Just the example I gave for
Right.
if I'm just noticing my energy patterns, I notice that I respond in a certain
Right.
way to this over and over again.
Yeah.
And I notice that I'm not like, I mean, if you ask me now, I'm not really, it doesn't feel like that story is real, or
Right, right.
it should be a certain way. I clearly see it should be.
Right.
I mean, it's just some random thing.
It's
from
ingrained,
past.
yeah, I get
Yeah,
it.
you know, it's a range, and it doesn't really matter in the
Mhm.
scheme of things. So by noticing, I mean, seeing some of these recurring patterns,
Right.
is there any value in that, or does that get back to more conceptualization and just thinking out loud?
From the point of view of yoga, it's unimportant in itself. From the
Unimportant.
point of view of sort of your psychology or self-improvement, you can notice that you're doing these things and try to remind yourself to recognize you're doing it, to not enact it, these sorts of things.
But are
but-
they at odds?
No, they're not at all at odds. It's like yoga is about recognizing what's real. It is not concerned with your functioning. So you could learn to play piano, or you could not learn to play piano. Whether you learn to play piano is neither here nor there from the point of view of yoga. But from the point of view of you, if you want to learn to play the piano, learn to play the piano. If you want to self-improve your functioning psychologically and work on recognizing, reactive emotions that are no longer important, and try to, by bringing awareness to it, diminish them somewhat in terms of your functioning, that's fine. But that has nothing to do with yoga one way or the other.
I meant at the same time, or in the same, like, when I said it's at odds, I meant
Right.
like, either you're staying entirely with the felt sense, whatever it is,
Right.
right, and not trying to analyze it at any level.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's not a matter of not trying to analyze. You're not trying to suppress analysis.
Okay.
You're just, analysis itself is just not an issue. Analysis
Wow.
is a small event in a vast system, and the point is to become aware of that system and its nature, and not worry about what's going on in any particular subsystem.
I have a question there with, so if I have anxiety,
Mhm.
I can do everything I can to calm it down with breathing or, whatever
Yeah.
techniques. Or I can see that anxiety as the system doing,
Yeah.
and then I can't really even say that it's anxiety. I can, if I have the wherewithal at all to,
Yeah.
which usually doesn't happen, the
Right.
anxiety is there, and I do techniques.
Right.
But if there is any wherewithal to see that that's the system, and then there's more to it, there's more happening.
Yeah. Absolutely.
To see the system.
Yeah. Which may or may not help the anxiety, but it is good yoga.
Yeah, and
That's
that's
amazing.
spontaneous too, because
Yeah.
I may not have that tiny little
Yeah.
insight. I may just struggle with
Yeah,
anxiety.
and you can also be aware of the system and work with the anxiety with the techniques.
Okay, right.
Because again, that's like learning to play piano while you're a yogi. They don't have anything to do with each other. Yoga is concerned with what is, and it's not concerned with what you do or what happens, what seems to happen.
It seems like the
They
anxiety.
don't interfere with each other.
It seems like the anxiety does calm down if I have that
Yeah.
insight.
Yeah, and that's wonderful.
Like,
That's
oh, this is just the radiance,
yeah.
and then I float, and the anxiety.
Well,
really
yeah,
fades.
that's very fortunate, because then you have a coincidence of yoga and functioning, which is wonderful. If yoga tends to optimize functioning, but it doesn't necessarily solve particular problems.
Right.
But it may be a benefit. So, but in general, yoga, it's a mistake to try to use yoga to go to yoga to solve problems. Although it may solve problems.
It seems
But
like
that's
it
not what it's
does.
for. Yeah. Well, that's right. Yeah, you're lucky then. That's fortunate. Yoga does tend to optimize functioning. So the more you have of sense, the more you are, settled in what you actually are, your functioning will tend to be optimized. You'll tend to function more intelligently, more efficiently. You'll tend to get out of your way a lot more.
I saw an example recently. Last year, starting in June, all the way through, I don't know, the end of November, I discontinued watching Netflix and I just ate in my sunroom. Sometimes I would just, stare outside, sometimes I would listen to a tape, and whatever that was. This year, I find myself starting
How did you know?
starting to watch Netflix in August, and so I looked at it, and then I heard Peter's voice. There's nothing gained or lost by eating in the sunroom or watching Netflix while you're eating dinner.
Right.
I just needed to verify that, because you just can't trust.
Peter's voice. This is Peter's voice saying, yep.
What was that?
This is Peter's voice saying, yep.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing gained or lost. It just goes against everything.
Yeah.
That-
The overarching rule of functioning in spirituality is it doesn't matter what happens, it doesn't matter what you do or don't do. The only thing that matters is what it is, and seeing and knowing what it is.
What is it? Is it just what you what is it? Yeah. I'm just thrilled.
So behaviorally you have carte blanche
Yeah.
from the point of view of yoga.
And it's not making me a worse person because I'm not sitting quietly in the sunroom with less.
Well, you'll tend to become a more genuine person. You'll tend to allow yourself to be who you really are anyway and follow your natural inclinations more. The more you see that what you do doesn't matter one way, neither here nor there. And as a result, your experience will probably be more satisfying just on that level.
Exactly.
Because you'll be doing what you want.
Exactly.
Instead of grappling with not letting yourself do what you want even though you want to do it.
Exactly.
And that whole can of it's like, why?
Excuse me, it's lovely, everyone. He's worth every dime.
Worth every non-existent dime.
Is this a new Catholic religion?
It's absolutely Catholic. It's the only absolutely Catholic religion. The real Catholic religion isn't Catholic.
So do you have any strictures on Friday about fish or anything?
No
You don't even
strictures.
want, if you want to.
The Windwatchers chapter.
Peter, would you like to answer a question that somebody asked?
Of course.
Yeah, okay, so this is from a person calling himself Nugga Bob. So I'm going to ask his question for you. Why can letting go, relaxing, or the sensation of dissolving include tremendous fear? How can someone go through the fear? Is there a sense of dying to know absolute reality?
Yeah. We talked about this a little earlier from a slightly different angle. It's very common for people to be attached to their worldviews and their interpretive frameworks and to suppose that they depend upon these interpretive frameworks and that these interpretive frameworks are their security, their safety. And so if they abandon these interpretive frameworks, there's the fear that they're potentially abandoning their safety. It's like being out in the middle of the ocean and you have this nice, life raft that you're holding onto. And you're considering the idea of letting go of the life raft, well, that might be pretty terrifying. The problem is that in reality, the interpretive frameworks are not a life raft. They're like a lead weight that's dragging you down to the bottom. And so it's all ass backwards. But of course you don't know that when you think that the interpretive frameworks are a life raft. You're clinging to it for dear life, and And here's the hero comes along and says, well, just let go, you know. You'll be glad you did. And you're going like, what are you, nuts? You know, so in that context, that can provoke fear, that can provoke anxiety. It seems, you know, risky. But fortunately, in genuine spirituality, it's not a binary system like that. It's not like you need to be holding on or letting go. It's rather like with the water, you don't need to dive into the deep end of the pool. You can walk up to the side and dip your toe in and see how it feels. So you can explore reality very gently and non-threateningly without it provoking this sort of fear response. And as you do so gradually, you know, with continued explorations, you may eventually discover that, well, hey, you know, this uninterpreted reality is actually kind of fun. It's actually kind of soft and fuzzy and friendly. It's actually kind of delicious. And it's kind of a lot more fun in my interpretation. Maybe I should, you know, dip into it a little deeper. Or not. Maybe you'll decide to cling to your interpretations. And hey, that's what most people do, so I guess you'll be in good company.
Yeah, now whenever I walk across the stream, I always remember your analogy of it's kind of like your foot's on the shore and you put your foot on this rock and you're
Right.
trying to check to see if you're going to put all your weight on that rock, and knowing that if you do, you can't get on the shore.
Right.
So at one point you just have to, you know, kind of go all in.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit different, but yeah.
It's a little different, isn't it?
That's really great because the truth is so nourishing.
It's so nourishing.
So warm and floaty.
It totally is. You know, and you can discover that gently. You don't need to jump off a cliff. You don't need to dive in the deep end. You can just it's right here. So just feel it, play with it, and gently, and you'll discover for yourself. Well, this isn't so bad. You know, this doesn't hurt. There's nothing that scary here. It's, you know, it's kind of fun. It's kind of it's really cool. You know, you'll save a lot of money on drugs.
Yeah.
You actually don't have to let go. Well, maybe you said.
Yeah. It turns out you don't have to let
in
go.
order to feel the floating.
That's right. If you discover you don't actually even have to let go of the life raft, you have to take it with you. That's absolutely true. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, you really. I mean, your spirituality is surprising because you get your cake and eat it. You know, you get to find God and discover you are God, but you don't lose your life and your personality and the things that you love. You know, you get it all. It's you know, there's no downside.
But people believe they're suffering, and that's the ticket. That's the.
Yeah, and you have nothing to lose but your suffering.
So Peter, is it, to you, is it sort of like when we were talking earlier about bliss, and I kept thinking about bliss versus its opposite, and it sounds like that the bliss you're talking about is a bliss that you're living it. When you first experienced it, it's because there was such a contrast that it just blew you away, but then after you're living it for a while, it becomes that's the new normal.
Yeah, sure.
So it's just sort of a recalibration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, yogic discovery or realization can be very shocking at first because it's in many ways it seems so drastically different than the interpreted perspective that one is used to orient to. But as you say, as you become more and more familiar with it, it just becomes the new normal, and you discover it's actually the old normal too,
Yeah.
because it's the world of reality is the world where you've always been anyway. So everyone's actually completely familiar with it. There's no, you know, as surprising as it is in its genuine nature, it's actually also completely familiar, and you've known it all your life. So it's also completely unsurprising.
Can you see reality and keep your story?
Sure, of course. You won't believe your stories as fully, but you'll be living them. It'll be like something you play. It'll be like play acting or you know, theater or something.
But who would want to?
Well, you know, in a very real sense, it depends what you mean by keeping your story, but in a very real sense, you are who you are, and you will be able to enact that as personally as you choose to, or as personally as you're inclined to, no matter how deeply you realize what reality is. So again, you get your cake and eat it. There's no dichotomy between realization and personal functioning or personal identity.
Well, my story was, I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
You know, my mother beat me, that made me unlovable. And I clung to that because all of life was reflecting that back to me.
Right.
Until Peter Brown, of course. And, no, but then.
Operators are standing by, ladies and gentlemen. Just dial the number at the bottom of your screen. Pull up that number.
But then, you
Any
know,
donation larger than $10,000, that is.
we don't take change. But, you know, who wants that? You know,
It was that day.
Yeah.
But if you didn't want it, you could have it.
Okay, fair enough. You're right. You have whatever you want.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the little kids that play pirate and
Yeah.
they can't wait to die.
Sure.
Like they fight and then they're the ones that get to die. And from reality's point of view, this is all good fun or
Yeah.
interesting. That good fun isn't a way to describe the profound suffering we
Yeah.
have. But this is what it's doing. It's
Yeah.
pretending to be a pirate
Yeah.
and experience the full.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But the good news from the point of view of yoga is even no matter what's happening in your life, it's possible to know the fullness. It's possible to know the divinity, and then you have your cake and eat it.
If you say that anymore, I'm gonna want to go get cake.
Mugga Bob said thank you, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think you used the phrase, the value is in seeing what this is.
Yeah.
And that can sound a little bit abstract. Would you say in practical terms it translates to something like peace regardless of circumstances? Or
Well, that's abstract too.
yeah.
But yeah, you could say. I mean, you could say that. I mean, if I wanted to be less abstract, I would say it translates to. Let's see. It translates to no argument with reality. Like zero. Not just no argument, but like not even on the horizon, not even the possibility of argument with reality. Absolutely settled in at what actually is, the way it actually is in that instant. Which is peace. But it's not necessarily peace in the sense of relaxation or non-action or anything like that. But it's peace in the sense that there's no pushing on anything and nothing resisting that pushing.
So I'd like to follow up on that. It's not necessarily non-action. And maybe someday I'll stop asking this question. When we hear about distress, people's distress, how can we meet that? And I know you've talked about personal, but I just need to hear it.
Well, you meet it how you do. You meet it according to your inclination of the way you meet it. How do you meet it? What do you do when you hear about distress, when you see distress? When you're with someone who's in distress, what do you do?
Well, it's
Or,
more.
when I say do, I don't mean what do you do, but what do you do, what do you feel, what's the whole gestalt of what's
Well,
up with
it's
that?
usually not in front of me, it's usually
Okay,
in the news and.
okay, well, you're fortunate.
Yeah, you know, so, I don't know, I hear it on the radio, on NPR, I just send love, you know, but. Yeah, I think it's again, the whole sunroom thing, I should be, you know, eating in the sunroom instead of.
Yeah, there's no should, there's just genuineness.
Mm.
So the question is, what do you do? And that's the genuine answer to your question. Well, there's no should. It's not what should I do, but what do I do? And then you discover your nature. And there's no correct answer. It's not like, oh, you should be like this and you shouldn't be like that. It's just, what do you do? What is that in your world?
So there can be a feeling of sadness arising.
There can be anything.
Yeah.
There could be sadness, there could be love, there could be agony, there could be disinterest, there could be, you know, hop on a plane and fly over to the disaster and roll up your sleeves and get bloody, or I mean, it can be anything.
And none of it is better or not as good.
Right? It's all just you enacting your nature.
Oh, jeez. Maybe I won't have to ask that question anymore.
We'll see. The jury's out. Should we take 5 minutes?
Yeah, leave it there.
How late do we go here? How late do we go? How late?
We're
Oh,
reserved
we can go till
to
5. We got to room till 5.
Okay, well, we'll take a break and then we'll see how people feel.
Yeah,
It's kind of a nice flow this afternoon.
yeah, it's going good.
And see how you feel.
Yeah.
You can just go.
Yeah, well, I'm people too.
You know, say that.
Wait a second. I came under different pretense.
Yeah, I'm a person too. You know.
Oh, we can.
I don't believe it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make something of myself.
We'll be coming here, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
This is where you turn the camera around. I better not do that.
Do it, I dare you.
Where's that Starbucks? Here?
Oh, a little bit. It's a bit of a walk.
Oh, is it
Where do you want to go? Coffee?
coffee or, yeah.
Oh, I'll
Where'd
take you
go?
down there.
To Starbucks?
Yeah, it's 2 minutes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Or you can point me in the right
I need to get a
direction.
fresh one anyway. That's a decaf. This one's too strong.
Oh,
I'll never sleep, so let's go.
okay.
Maybe Peter, just Peter?
Anybody else want to go? You want a quick trip to Starbucks? We can drive.
Alright.
You good? Anybody? Anybody want anything?
She totally has.
Caffeine.
Oh, I just had some at lunch. Okay, stop that.
Better with butter, but and Mark might be able to, you know, it depends if you want it, how wide you want to show.
Unless there's a different kind.
That's what I'm saying. What oil would be good?
Also, I really,
Coconut. Coconut oil would be good.
I'd really like to put some ravioli.
What about the fish you see on the way home?
Okay, is that if we find
Roger doesn't live in vitamins too, if they have them.
Okay. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
Ask those guys if they have, coconut or even a truffle oil,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like get a real, real nice, like,
Yeah.
this is the,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's some fancy, or even a little tiny bottle of a really high-end olive oil or something. Just
yeah.
to make it special. Yeah. It's so special, just so spectacular.
You want me to?
Sure. Ministries are always in oil, right?
And oh,
I can do it. I'm a little, it's a little very pretty, like in the past when I put oils in the tube, it kind of, you know, it surges up.
Did you ever try this? Sort of let the weight of your hand, you don't pull with the weight of your hand, it's kind of like rather than forward. And then palm forward. And you just kind of feel around and sometimes you find it's interesting. Have you done that before?
I have a lot of time. Yeah.
And after that one, leave the head on top of it.
Okay.
Take the next one. And then take that same one and stop back. Just kind of for a really nice spread of the shoulder. It's hard to do
The problem is that when it cuts the oil.
so Nancy, any Netflix recommendations then?
Oh, yeah, I've got tons, but I don't have them on the top of my head. In fact, when I see something really good, that night, afterwards, I go on my Facebook page and I do a little plug, I say, because mostly my Netflix are either about, culture, nature, usually a combination, some of them not too many anymore.
We're getting sick of it, aren't we?
But I am watching something really interesting now, it's 5 parts. The family, and it's,
Oh, I've heard good stuff about that.
it's crazy. And it's how, really, basically, we are run in this country by rich white men. And under the valence of Christianity, which has nothing to do about religion. I mean, it's what's happening now. With the whole, oh, that's right, you guys, you can't.
We follow. There's no way.
Yeah, with the whole evangelical thing,
Right.
and people are always on Facebook going, and if these are guys are Christians, how come, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's like,
Do as they say, not as I do.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so if you, oh, yeah, well, I've got
Yeah,
you.
I plan on watching that one. Have you seen Mindhunter? Mindhunter?
I did, I saw.
It's very
it.
dark, but I thought being
Yeah,
a
I saw it
psychologist, you might find it
yeah,
interesting.
I liked it a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There's a new one now, I'm probably not gonna watch it. My tastes have just shifted really to, nature. I just love anything that has to do with how the earth works, you know,
The symphony of it all.
yeah, this weather, oh, decoding the weather. Decoding the weather. It's a stupid name, but it's so uninteresting. It's been quite a while. Just go watch it, and it's phenomenal. Really phenomenal. So, yeah, I'd love to send you guys some and I would love to. Oh, well then I can make friends.
Sure.
Because those are the kind of things that I post.
Okay. Well, you should probably avoid my outrage.
I'm making it.
It won't be good for your mental
I
health.
know. I mean, obviously, right.
Get it out of the system somehow.
You're like, whatever, you know, so I can, whatever, when somebody's doing something, I just hide that post, that's all. I'm not on it so much anymore, much shorter, because it is kind of getting like too much political bullshit, and I'm just realizing more and more that this is going just the way it's going.
I don't know.
And there's nothing to be done, and, you know, if you watch enough science, you realize that the earth has gone through all kinds of cataclysms. So what's new? Everybody's freaking out.
Yeah. Might be sort of a human arrogance that thinks that We're in charge of fixing
Just-
everything.
Yeah, I know, like,
Mhm.
like just constant confirmation and like raising my head, it's wonderful. So it's just that kind of, even though I go through my physics, you know, so I'm going into this stuff, I could do it. So I just, I, you know, when
Good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, up here.
you know,
Just average.
I don't know, something,
12,
I
I
think,
think that's usually average up here. Different people come all different times.
you know, when you put my dad in there, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's not only that in alcohol.
Yeah, I think there's probably
medication that you want, it's not that it's not happening.
sort of lots of it can come and go.
And food is not healing, like,
The things to
The ones that really
yeah, and I'm just,
or they just
happy
come
to
and
hear one
go.
thing out with you, but I didn't want to push it
This
so
morning
much.
we were more.
I can get into this too. I'm like, well, no, forever, ever, and ever, maybe not. But,
Well, it started in 2005. And I think we started traveling to LA here maybe 2007 or 2009. He's like only up here.
that's my mind, like, why couldn't I just say that?
About it from the friend that went to church on the adoption.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why I made the trip over there.
I know, yeah.
I didn't know anything about
I
it.
know, it was a
Wish I
lesson.
would know.
I know, we just, it happened, it just happened so quick, and it's like, oh no, we should, and Mark had already bought their enthusiasm.
Did you have a similar seminar here, or just the talks at the library?
Just library talks,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Sometimes I don't see it right away.
Do you wanna meet, he does, if he has time, he'll meet with you privately.
Sorry, okay.
Well, you are, I can sign some course off, eh?
Soon, right?
You can make the talks, you know, there's.
For a long time.
Uh-huh.
Have you been emailing him?
I just sent one email, of course he doesn't take any running, but I sent one email to, maybe I don't have the right address for it, but I sent it to the retreat, email.
That
Help
might
me.
be like, so get on his website and go to contact issue. Info at open door.
When it's literate, when it comes to computer science, Bob.
Oh, okay. But he
Oh.
he'll email. So that way he can.
That's
He
interesting.
can read
Okay.
and really think about your question, and then he can reply when he's got time.
That was
Emails are
like a
really
very
great.
Okay.
Or Skype. Of course, that's still computer, and then while he's up here, you can.
Do you live anywhere near there? Well, all the questions are answered before.
Yeah, it's nice though, meeting with him privately is very.
Yeah. Well, from the summit down there, I realized I fell both into nihilism and eternalism, in either this or that. It's a hard because I've been working on it for so long. Trying to understand, conceptualize influence as something, you know, to conceptualize. And I hadn't realized that it turned into. And so right away I got the worst of both.
Did you put that into mine? Right,
Oh.
that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you very much.
Because it's not, it's so small.
Well, I actually never done
Cameras on.
just no shock or the
Right.
but obviously I want to. Well, I love architectural conception, so.
Stumble under.
I'm retired now, so I can quite a bit of time.
Hey, Peter,
what's your name?
what's your email address? Is it info@?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Hit my head too. Thank you.
Not your head.
No, it's far.
So are you in the area, Seattle?
No, I live in West Seattle. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Edmonds,
Oh, Edmonds is nice.
near the water.
Yeah.
And, so I get to see Peter on the
Oh, James,
his
Wheeler's falling off the mountain.
Saturdays.
I say, I don't know anything about him.
I don't know if he's gonna.
Well, just through a friend, that I met, went to a couple of Zugchins.
Oh,
He's changed his perspective a little bit, or?
With Keith Dowman.
yeah. It's my main meal.
Yeah. So between the two, I'm quite happy now with my spiritual material, which is like, I found that
a rumor at least that
Shaivism
to India
and Dzogchen both
are
say the same thing, different flavor in the food.
Different flavor in the food, that's nice.
Yeah. So,
I haven't heard an update.
Oh, cool.
But I think you have to say what else you have to do. One name call.
it's like I've been doing a lot of
That's
psychology.
what I heard at one point.
Well, my bread and butter is a psychotherapist.
Yeah, sure.
Or not anyone else that I know.
So, can patient cure itself? Can the patient cure itself?
I don't know.
Were you just looking
I'm
at
basically bringing a version of this to my handful of clients that I'm seeing now.
Mhm.
I've cut back my energy, so
Okay.
I'm just working with a handful of people.
More from you?
Where I want to see.
Oh,
it,
this is
basically.
out there exploring.
I ran into a book again I hadn't read in many years, When to Dance
Those
And
wounds
he
or
was
whatever she's
sending
telling
me
her.
because he was a psychotherapist.
There's no way for me
In psychology.
what it is and that it's not
Exactly
either.
what she offers.
Because I was just looking, and in the moment of it, even if it sounds very personal, it's very like central almost,
Yeah.
you know, or like in the eye of the storm or whatever.
No,
Or very big or whatever, it takes shape. There's no, it's
Yeah.
not, it wasn't me either.
Or you're lucky with
It's
that.
just this kind of quality that interaction has, or dimensionality, even if it's not physical or,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it has a kind of texturality and a kind of feeling of personalness.
Right.
But it's not. There's no way to orient to it or to tell what it is. Or
No way.
Absolutely not. And it can have a very intense flavor, but again, it's just dancing with that energy.
Yeah.
Or the energy is dancing with itself in a
Right.
way.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. So it's, yeah, it's absolutely, yeah, always. Are you surfing? Who's surfing?
Welcome back. I can do better than that. Welcome back. That was a better one.
You mentioned that this is yoga is a solo thing.
Yes.
you know. But then there's also this notion of good company and satsang. I mean, that's also a beautiful thing too. right?
Sure. But solo in the sense that your process and where you are is unique to you. And you may be with fellow beings who are in a similar process, but the specifics of what their process is and where they are in it will be different than where you are. So it's not a matter of that you're cut off from everything and you're alone on a desert island. It's more a matter of that you can't assume that what's going on with you is going on with anyone else or vice versa. Even if you're all, in a similar process, generally speaking. No, I think like these kind of meetings can be very beneficial. Just to be exposed to, when you see things from other people's point of view, it can triangulate or shed interesting, perspective on what's going on with you, even if what's going on with you is not immediately necessarily what's going on with them at the moment. A whole lot of yoga has to do with self-empowerment, which basically means to discover that you're the final authority on yourself. And at the same time, it's also about letting go of self-importance. So it's a paradox, in a way. Earlier on in the process of unfoldment, we have a lot of self-importance, and at the same time we're looking to outside authorities because we don't have self-empowerment in terms of trusting or believing ourselves and our own perspectives. We're looking for someone outside ourselves to validate it or tell us what's going on. And as unfoldment occurs, the self-importance fades, and the self, what do I call it? Self-empowerment grows until you discover that you're the sole authority on your reality, and you don't care whether or not anyone understands you or agrees or disagrees or anything, because it's laughable because they don't know.
That's funny. You guys are all crazy. I'm the one that knows.
That's right.
That's pretty scary.
That's right. Well, it's largely true.
That's where my path started.
Yeah, right. You'll end where you began.
So this going up the hill, down the hill, that's it's not literally like a one trip up, one trip
No,
down.
not in the least.
The whole process is like
Yeah, it can be like a reciprocating engine where you're sort of doing both at the same time, or one or the other, and a little. But in general, in the earlier phase of yoga, the yogi is fighting to get out of their normalcy and out of their addiction to the interpretive frame of reference, and to become more and more familiar with actuality, with uninterpreted actuality. And then the second phase, in general, there'll be more and more, from the point of view of familiarity with the nature, there'll be more and more integrating how everything is in fact that nature. Because initially it's about discrimination. You're separating everything from the nature so you can study it purely. And then as you become very familiar with the pure nature of actuality, then you begin to reintegrate things. You begin to look at your personality, you look at your mental function, you look at all these different things and discover the way in which they are it too. So it reintegrates and reaccumulates until everything is included in actuality. Again, not necessarily as a linear, strictly one and then the other, but in general, that's the pattern of it. And it's a good idea to honor, it's important to honor your process, to be to be honest about where you are, where each individual is in your process, because that's what's important for you to work with, rather than trying to get ahead of yourself and trying to say, well, gee, the advanced yogis are all dealing with this, let me deal with that too. Because it won't be as powerful as if you go through the genuine organic process. Then you'll have the authority that you get each step of the way by really seeing what there is to see there.
So in both Hindu and Buddhist tradition, we kind of have this notion where the Mahavakya would say something like the world is an illusion, Brahman or
Right.
this radiant presence alone is real, and then the roundabout would be Brahman is the world, and that's the trip down.
Yeah, exactly so.
Okay.
And it's seen very precisely the way in which that's so in your own experience, rather than just as a philosophical proposition.
So every time you reject, you kind of go into exploring, or I mean, I'm not saying reject as in rejecting concepts, then go inquire, and then you come back. It's kind of like you just bring the light back.
Yeah.
And to shine on your darker aspects.
Sure.
Okay.
You can say that, yeah. It's not literally darker or lighter, but yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Peter, could you comment on the word lucidity? Because this is what he's bringing up, that lighter, darker thing. Lucidity, like if I'm lucid in a dream, there's a change that happens. There's a subtle thing, and then I see that this is a dream. All texture changes.
Yes.
It's like it's a bubble floating and it's mine, and all those sort of feelings, you can't really describe it. But then you one time, many years ago, you said that the awakening or the realization is very much like becoming lucid in your experience.
Right.
Can you comment on that?
Sure. Lucidity, the word lucidity refers, of course, to light.
Yeah.
And the light that's being, excuse me, the light that's being referred to is the radiant presence. So it's not lucidity as a metaphor for something or an analogy. It's literally the feeling of the substance of what is present. So you know that all that's present is patterns of light. The felt presence of the radiance is what lucidity actually is. And that's the true condition, that's the true context. Yoga is all about the substance of reality. Everything that's here is made of something. It's all made of basically one thing. And the real question is, what is this one thing? And that has such peculiar properties that it looks like all this.
And so, there's the idea, and this happened to me one time, is in dreamless sleep, you don't know you're in dreamless sleep, and then when you start dreaming, you don't know you're really there. You're mostly just carried away, just like you are in your normal waking state.
Yeah.
But it's possible, and I've had the experience where you go lucid in your dreamless state.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, and you will tend to be more and more lucid in all states as a more or less constant background condition.
Yeah.
Do you watch yourself dreaming? Or do you watch yourself sleeping, or you're just watching?
It's not a watching so much as it is a knowing of presence outside the context of the dreaming per se. Just like right here, there's a knowing of presence, and then there's us sitting in this room having these conversations. So the sitting in the room and having the conversations is happening, but there's a knowing of presence which is independent of the room and the conversations. That's an absolute constant. And if I went to sleep, that presence would still be constant, even though the room would disappear and the people would disappear. And perhaps I would start dreaming and different people would appear or whatever.
Do you perceive everything as a glowing light then?
Yeah.
Inside and out?
There's no inside and there's no outside. It's all just a field, an inclusive field.
Did that happen slowly over a period of time of being around the guy that turned you on, for lack of a better word?
No. Well, yes.
Gotta watch it.
I better leave it at that. I'll let you pick one.
I'll take both.
Okay.
So you're talking about, you've often mentioned this in the past, it's a knowing by being,
Yes.
knowing by identity. It's,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's different than,
And it's a felt.
different than being aware of your being aware. That's not-
Absolutely. It's knowing by being, but it's not knowing by being in an abstract sense. It's knowing by feeling being.
Yes.
It's very much the felt, immediate, tactile, full-on sense
That
of.
has nothing to do with any
being.
intellectual idea
No.
or thoughts. There's nothing
No.
involved in that.
No.
Yes.
Experiencing.
Experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, experience is good too.
Experiencing as a full contact sport.
Yeah.
A full contact export.
Ex-
What do they call it? What do they call this? Extreme sport.
Oh, extreme sport.
We always use it, the Tibetans often talk about water into water, or
Yeah.
H2O into H2O. It's like
Yeah.
the way it recognizes water and then it goes back into the water, and there's never been a change. It just becomes that being, I guess.
So there can be a pitfall of psychologically thinking you're doing it when you aren't experiencing it?
It's not a pitfall, it's just untrue.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter what you're thinking or not thinking, the important thing is seeing what it is.
Or the
Or knowing what
disease
it is.
of imagination is what I was trying to refer
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Imagination is of no value,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, in yoga. Well, it's a very, very little value. Let me say that. You know, the value is the felt presence of actuality, the known / felt presence of actuality, which is immediate and felt / known.
Every time I come up with a question, I answer it with what you would say before I ask it, so
Good. You're
I
saving me
have
the
to warm
effort.
up.
That's good. Save me the effort. You won't even need to come next time. And just stay home and
I can do that.
You know, I've been playing with my clients really recently about this experiencing the felt sense of experiencing or being here now. And it's really quite amazing that they believe they can't, or they
yeah.
don't.
I know it's remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing?
And I would say, well, are you here? How do you know you're here? Of course, we've been playing with this one. They say, well, I can hear, I can feel. I said, well, can you sense your presence? And you know, what I understand it to be is it's just totally locked into thought. And it's just really astonishing.
Yeah, you know, it's the human condition is amazing. I mean, the way that the majority of us seem to be so, you know, unquestioningly oriented to our concepts as if they were actual.
Well, at the exclusion of everything else.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. But if your concepts are actual, then there is no everything else. Because your concepts define what's
everything.
true and define what's not true, and everything else is in the not true category.
Right.
Wow.
And you've got to talk to the authorities if you want to go beyond that.
Yeah. The Bible says, or the scientists say, or the,
Right.
or you know, the politicians say, or somebody says.
Yeah. That is crazy. Everybody on YouTube is actually watching you 30 seconds in the past because there's a delay. So I'm watching it and I'm seeing you wave like that and it has nothing to do with
But
it.
they don't know that. They don't know that. They might say it's in the future.
Yeah, good.
So what's interesting is this felt sense and this, which is not separate from the experiential field.
The experiential field is the felt sense, and the felt sense is the experiential field. Noticing that experience is felt is the felt sense. And it's not a feeling that you aren't already doing. It's noticing that that feeling is already inherently happening, unstoppably happening. You can't do it, you can't not do it. You can't make your experience go away.
The felt sense is the experiential field, is that right?
Yes, yes. The presence of experiencing is the experiencing of experiencing. It's not like there's something here and there's something over here experiencing. The presence is experiencing, and experiencing is presence.
So tricky.
I'm playing around with something that I was reading from this Tibetan Naida guy. He was talking about the state where, you know, as we get older, we try to remember to say something, and when we reach this bewildered state, we reflect a dummy. He says that's actually just the state you want to get to.
Right.
Just before then the lucidness comes in there, and then that's defined as recognizing.
Yeah.
Awareness recognizing itself, or consciousness seeing itself.
Yeah.
So Rigpa, they call it Rigpa. So that's a lot of those things they do to try to, there's different methods they do or try to bring that on.
Yeah. All they do is just wait a few years.
Yeah, but then who gets that, right?
So not everyone that wants to be relieved of Alzheimer's, but this would be a state.
So the felt sense of being, I mean, it's felt. There is just this really subtle seeming parsing from the way I seem to be speaking this. There is a felt sense of being. Well, what the words want to say is part of the experiential field, but that's a parsing. So there's a little.
There's no part.
I know.
The felt sense is the being, is the experiential field, is you, is reality, is God. All equal signs.
So should we be like the Egyptians when they mummify the the bodies where they save all the organs but throughout the brain?
I don't hear. Choose yourself.
How do you know they threw it out? Maybe they ate it.
That's what I was thinking.
Crocodile
It's the
guy.
best part. The best part, who would throw it out?
Yeah, well, 1-800 zombies, they will do the job.
Oh, yeah?
So it seems like there might be this very subtle sense of me.
There might be. But the sense of me is no more or less subtle than anything. The sense of me equals the felt sense, equals being, equals the experiential field, equals presence, equals God.
Oh my gosh.
So there's nothing to get rid of.
Nothing to get rid
Just
of.
to, you know, just
Wow.
how it's
Wow.
Nothing to get
clear
rid
it
of.
all.
Here it is.
Yep.
Whole shooting match. Just like always.
Couldn't get rid of it if you tried, I guess.
No.
Could you say that again? I was just so blown away. Sense of me.
Sense of you is the felt sense of being, is reality, is the experiential field, is radiant presence, is God.
Wow. Just amazing.
And if you want to, you can extend that is to any word in the dictionary too.
Wow. It's so,
That's a lot of writing now.
yeah.
You just do dot, dot, dot.
Yeah, that
That's
was
what I
it.
do.
Oh. There's no place to get to, there's nothing to get rid of. Holy crap.
I'll do everything.
Oh my. Hmm.
I'm kind of feeling like we're winding down. Why don't we knock it off in a couple of minutes? Any urgent questions that haven't been addressed? I know some of you must have a, yeah, but, in the back of your mind. That all sounds great, but what about?
Well, I was startled. When I went down to see in California just recently, I came back and I discovered that because I was trying so hard to conceptualize emptiness, that I'd fallen in both nihilism and eternalism at the same time, and I hadn't noticed it, which was really helpful. I was both horrified and thrilled. So, thank you.
That's good.
So can I have them both?
As far as you know, it doesn't matter. They're all just versions of the same thing, so there's no actual, antagonism there.
You did talk about, though, trying to get to not one side or the other of the coin, but get the coin itself, so.
Yeah.
Without
But when you hit the coin, you have both sides.
Yeah, right,
So the sides are not a problem, but just notice that there's a coin there too.
yeah.
And then you have both sides without the sides being a dichotomy.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all for joining me today.
Being here,
Lovely to see you.
stay healthy.